Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our ongoing live stream, Let's Write an Adventure, where I, RJ Kerr, your host, am walking you through writing a full campaign in real time, um, with with all the warts and all being shown in here, all the thought process that goes into this, and including our own custom domain of dread. So, if you're joining us for the very first time, what we're doing here is, like I said, is we've got our own custom campaign that we're working on. We've already done a fair amount of work on this. We have built out our entrance into this, and so we figured out how our characters enter our domain of dread through a portal that opens up on the Blood Moon. We've talked a little bit about what draws them into the adventure. We have created our landing spot in this domain of dread, a shantytown called Darkport, that's ruled by a number of conflicting factions and gangs. Uh, and we've set this on the edge of a giant inland sea that populates most of our domain of dread. We've identified the villain, our elemental villain Evander, who's the entity that it's captured within that domain of dread, and we have built out our very first adventure where our characters are kidnapped, briefly enslaved, and must escape their captors. And in doing so, learn about the existence of an artifact of great power that gives the wielder power over this domain of dread and is likely their best source for escaping this world alive. So we have started building out that proactive portion of the adventure where the characters have escaped captivity and are now out in the world making moves, trying to find this artifact and, well, escape, right? So we spent a little time. Let me go ahead and share my screen here so you can kind of see what I'm doing. We've spent a little time building out a number of investigative scenes to populate a node structure sort of paradigm that does a couple things for us. Um, One, we don't really know how the characters are going to decide to move forward at this point in the adventure. This is a very open ended place, and the characters have a lot of agency, and we want that agency. We want to nurture that agency, but we want a structure that allows us to have some things prepped so we don't have to pull everything completely out of a hat as we play the adventure. And so we're using a node structure which connects all of what we're calling investigative scenes to with a number of clues, and we've sort of overpopulated this world with clues, and we're working on overpopulating this world with clues that lead from one scene to another, so that the characters can find them and get around and get all the information they need to eventually discover the location of this artifact. Um, the other thing it lets us do is it gives us a cool opportunity to do some world building, where this is really the first time the characters get a chance to kind of get out into the wide world and explore all on their own. And so we want it to cover a fair amount of ground so that they can go to cool places and kind of see our domain of dread and get around in the area. And they're not just stuck in Darkport getting all the information they need in this one spot. They have got a plethora of places to explore. And that kind of brings us to our topic for the night. We had been building out some of these little investigative scenes and creating mini adventures, and we will pick that back up on Monday. Um, but for this evening, I wanted to talk a little bit about travel in D&D. I want, or frankly, in any TTRPG. Um, different TTRPGs have different mechanisms for travel, have different rules for that. Um, One of the criticisms that pops up a fair amount of D&D is that travel is boring. And I don't think that it needs to be. And I don't think it needs to be something that we build a lot of mechanics around necessarily. I don't think it needs to be something that we build out little mini games to handle. I think it matters in kind of how we go about telling the story and how we approach travel as a whole. So I I try to approach travel in a way that makes me reflect on real travel that I've had. And I think about what it is that makes like real life travel so transformative. What about what is it about going from point A to point B in the real world that can be so much fun as opposed to a tedious, horrible slog, right? Uh, because we think about like, maybe our daily commute to work or what have you, and that's not exactly, a fun experience most of the time. But you go on vacation and you travel somewhere, and the travel itself can be an incredibly enjoyable part of the experience. And it's not just about getting there; that travel can be part of the adventure too. In fact, I think that it is. And so I like to think about what it is that makes that difference, right? And some of what that comes down to is, well, let me frame it in sort of two ways. Part of what that comes down to is novelty, right? There's something new and different happening when we go on vacation and travel than there is when we hop in the car to do our daily commute to work and travel, right? Because that's something that we do all the time and it becomes repetitive and it becomes normal. And it's something that, frankly, I think most of us wish we could kind of just time skip over a lot of the time. But when we're on vacation and we're going someplace new and novel, we're experiencing something different, right? So one, we have a novel experience. We want travel to be different each time that we do it, uh, and that helps add to some of the excitement. We want there to be different experiences every time. The other bit is travel in the real world changes you as a person, right? You get different perspectives. You interact with different cultures. You get out of your hometown and see things that you've never seen before. And it broadens your horizon. It affects you in a very personal kind of way. And so the other factor that I think about in D&D and TTRPG travel is the role-playing aspect of it in terms of how does that travel and the events that surround it affect your characters. Now, there's a lot of mechanisms out there that people have tried to kind of use to incorporate to make travel interesting. Um, and a lot of what I've seen comes down to, you know, we're gonna create skill checks for this. We're gonna, create a system in which they need to have all the right gear and they need to account for this and that, and there's nothing wrong with any of the adding logistical elements to your travel in D&D. In fact, I do it all the time myself in terms of, you need bedroll, need your rations, you need your water for travel, you need supplies, especially if you're playing a campaign that leans heavily into that sort of thing. Like the Tomb of Annihilation, I think is made better with some of the logistical management, having to portage your canoes over through the jungle and what have you. All of that adds to some of the verisimilitude and some of the and makes it very, I think, realistic and adds some of the threats that don't often get incorporated into D&D adventures. Things like getting exhaustion from not having a good night's sleep or not having enough to eat. Um, those sorts of hazards that can really kind of change the outcome of the encounters in the following day. And so I'm not advocating that you get rid of that kind of stuff from your game. I think that depends wholeheartedly on the sort of adventure that you're playing, and whether or not you and your characters like to manage that kind of stuff, whether you think it's enjoyable. The bit that I'm talking about is that the other thing that people do is they just create a random encounters table, and you assume that the novelty of an encounter, whether that's a combat encounter or a non-combat encounter or what have you, is going to make the difference, right? And so you end up in a situation where you're spending a lot of time tabulating sort of the logistics of travel, and then you occasionally have these moments, these heightened moments of combat out in the wilderness where they see the characters stumble on something unexpected. And while I think that that is on the right track at its heart, I think that there's a better way to go about that, especially when you're trying to use travel for, you know, for one of its biggest strengths, and that's world building, showing off this world that you've created to your characters. Um, and so I want to talk a little bit about doing that today. And so we're going to take a break from the go section of our story circle, and we're going to go over to search. And we are going to talk about some things that can come up during travel. And you notice in the search section here, we have that this is where the plan goes to hell. The world around the characters reacts and attempts to maintain the status quo, right? And so to some degree, we are creating challenges that our characters are going to have to face and overcome because those challenges make a difference. And they don't always have to be combat challenges, right? There can be role-playing challenges. There can be situational challenges. Um, there could be equipment challenges, all that kind of stuff that we could build into this. But there's also a whole world of other interactions that we can weave into our travel that'll really make it come alive and make it more than just a series of roles, because that's where I think travel in TTRPGs can become very, very boring, is when it's just a game of, let's make a bunch of successive rolls and hope that we average better than we thought we would. We have it, or that our rolls come out higher than the average. And I don't personally find a lot of enjoyment on that. I don't find that it reflects travel appropriately. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because we're going to want a mix of stuff, right? When we are traveling here, when we are making travel interesting, we want a mix of points of interest. We want colorful sceneries and setting that we can use to punctuate the travel as we're narrating, because we don't want to narrate every single step. You want to narrate in scenes as you're talking your way through travel. And so giving colorful moments to characters as part of the description, because that's one of the cool things about real life travel, is the scenery that goes by and what that says about the shift between where you were and where you're going. And so we can use that to paint a picture. And so we want to build out some of that for ourselves so that we have that at our fingertips, so that we can easily narrate that. And then we want to build out encounters that challenge and change our characters. And so that is a mix of a lot of things. And combat encounters certainly have a place in there, but also role-play encounters, equipment setbacks, and the like, all are things that we can incorporate into a larger sort of, a more robust encounters table, we'll still call it, to really pull the travel experience into this world and make it feel more alive. All right, so one of the things that you can really do to help yourself out is come up with a basic map. And we're not going to worry about the map tonight. We're going to do more of the brainstorming kind of element to it here, because this is going to take a little bit of time, and we're going to want to build it out as we go. But a map can, even it's something just as basic as saying, well, we're going from a swamp to the mountains, or we're going from the coasts to the sea, or we're going upstream or downstream, or that sort of thing, can give you some basics for narration and give you some ideas for things that are iconic scenery wise, and that in that sort of in that sort of region. So we're going to start working on two lists. We're going to say we want points of interest, and we'll we'll put TBD here for the moment because we'll fill that out, and there'll be a number of those. And then we want encounters. And again, these aren't all combat encounters. Some of these are role-playing encounters and equipment malfunctions and cool things that they stumble across. I'm a fan of putting little mini dungeons in this kind of stuff, and I mean like micro dungeons, um, things that are literally 5 rooms at most. I've made a few that were like 3 rooms to kind of stumble across. You don't want a whole lot there, but that can be interesting. And we're really creating a pairing of the two, right? Where we have these sweeping points of interest that we can use in our narration, and then things of interest can happen in and around those areas. One of the suggestions that you'll get from a lot of pro DMs, and I think that again, so you want to be a game master by Justin Alexander. He talks about this in the section where he's actually talking about narrating travel in cities, but I think it applies no matter where you go, where he has an approach where you pair a point of interest with an encounter, where you narrate, a monument, and then the school kids playing a game around that, or a large market, and then the pickpocket. There's the role for the pickpocket to see if they pilfer your coin purse or what have you. And so we're kind of taking that and we're expanding that idea to a much larger scale to really encompass some larger scale travel, like out and about in the world, and making this sort of this world feel like it's coming alive. Looks like we've already got a comment here. We've got Jonathan Frost. If you want to do the emergent route, you could maybe have tables for terrain features and points of interest. You absolutely can. And if you've got the right group of players, that can work even better. You maybe don't even need to worry about a lot of this if you've got a group of really proactive players, characters who or players who want to tell the story as much as you do. You can simply start with a map and kind of have a oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to tap the mic there. And just do the old, you travel upriver, and the terrain slowly becomes rockier as you move into the mountains, and then you could ask somebody, what's something interesting that you see on the trip, and you can let them tell that story. You can let them come up with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It just takes the right kind of player for that. You want somebody who's going to think on their feet and come up with those ideas. And that's not every player. Not every player wants to do that. Some players, and I've done another video on this, or a short on this, where I talk about the 2 kinds of players. Some players are reactive players, and they're looking to be swept up in a story. And that, in that instance, that puts a lot more onus on you as the storyteller to come up with this kind of stuff. And you can always rely on your own imagination, but fortune favors the prepared mind, right? So while we've got the opportunity to prepare, we're gonna use some of these to come up with brainstorm potential points of interest that might exist in this world, and then think about the kinds of encounters that might occur throughout this world as well. And then by mixing and matching them with those points of interests, we come up with situations that feel novel and feel like they're moving the story forward and change the characters that engage with them. So I've done a lot of kind of talking about my theories about this. So let's get into the actual practice about it to kind of show what I mean. So we're going to brainstorm some point of interest here, and I frequently will sit down with a map on that and kind of use that to kind of guide my thought process on that. We'll end up jumping back and forth to the back to the go section here, where we kind of have a number of these places built out, and we'll use those to help us kind of brainstorm stuff that might exist between point A and point B. But for the encounters, we're gonna get a little more granular on this. And we're definitely gonna have some combat encounters. because the world is a dangerous place and we want to drive that home as well, right? TBD. Um, that's something that we want to be part of the message of this world building is that the world is not safe. And so there should be hazards and dangers in there. Then we're also going to have some social encounters. And actually, we're going to call these role play encounters, is what we're going to do. Because something that I like to do with these is not just you come across an interesting NPC and you potentially have a conversation with them, but also campfire kind of talk. Because so you're out camping in real life and you're sitting in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods, fire in front of you, you and your friends. It's a warm night, right? There's stars above. You've got nothing but time as the evening stretches ahead of you, and you've already, got your marshmallows and what have you, and you've had your dinner. You're not just sitting there in silence or talking. Maybe you're enjoying the atmosphere, but there is some sort of communication likely passing between you. And what is that? You get from experience a lot of heart-to-heart talks. They start light and funny, and then they get deep as the night goes on. And that's one of the magical things about camping and being out in the wilds. And so we can help create that at our D&D table by coming up with, as part of the role play encounters, role play prompts for campfire chat as part of our potential encounters that happen here. Because it's not just encounters with NPCs, it's PCs encountering PCs. And what do they talk about? What do they say? What is important to their character, and how does that change them? And so we can build some of that out here in these role play encounters. And so we'll have some NPC ones, and we'll have some PC encountering PC sort of prompts that we can use to kind of stimulate some of these quieter nights out on the trail. Because we want those highs and lows. We want to create those valleys of high action and low tension because each helps you appreciate the other. If you're always in constant tension and constant combat and constant conflict, that your players are going to get numb to that, and they're going to get just as bored with that as if you are if there's never any conflict, if there's never any tension. And so we're going to keep those. We're going to give ourselves some tools to have some rise and fall when we are doing our traveling. And the last section that we're going to have here is we're going to have hazard encounters, we're going to call that. And this is where the environment becomes the challenge, right? So it's not just an encounter with a hostile creature. It's quicksand and avalanches and rainstorms and all sorts of, whatever other magical kind of storms we want to come up with. This is where, the rations get, animals get into the rations and eat part of the food. This is where the water gets spilled. This is where, the campfire is, the firewood gets wet and you can't get a campfire that night, or you can't find an appropriate place to bed down and rest, and you're stuck with a storm coming in. That's all this kind of stuff that we can throw out there, which again makes a lively evening and doesn't require a whole lot from us mechanically, but it adds a layer of challenge to this travel experience that eradicates that, so you go from point A to point B and nothing of any difficulty happens. It adds that novelty to it. So let's go ahead and do a for instance for kind of one for each of these, and then we'll work on kind of brainstorming a whole bunch of them out, because the more we have, to a degree, the better. Obviously, you don't want the table to become so unwieldy that you just can't use it, but we're giving ourselves tools here, right? So let's come up with a point of interest that exists somewhere in our world. So let's come back over to our cool investigative scenes, and we already have some big points of interest. We already have some big things that exist in this world. Now we're looking for little things to be spotted along the way. Um, so let's see here. Um, what do we have so far? So we've got a place in Darkport. We've got a dungeon out in the wilds on the outskirts of Darkport. We have out in the sea. We have some place where this siren exists, where the siren lives. We have it, out on a shallow reef. Um, we have this ghost ship castle. We have the salt pillar that is the wizard's tower. We have this moving island with the shrine to Ovander on it. So let's think about the sort of stuff that we might see between Darkport and these places. Um, so let's say, what could come to mind on this? Because we've got like geological features that we could have in there. Because, I mean, places and those sorts of things. We could have rivers and tributaries. We could have other ruins. We could have little pockets of forest. We could have some swampy, marshy kind of areas there. We could have some small islands. We could have, yeah. Why don't we have little? Let's have a mangrove forest in here. Why don't we have that? Um, because that's something that would be on the coast potentially, and it could be a cool kind of gradient between a coastal environment and then heading out towards the reef. So we can have sort of a maze-like mangrove forest going on here. And so let's put that as a point of interest. Let's see, a maze-like mangrove forest. All right. And that's something for us that's a point of interest, something that appears as we travel from point A to point B. And we can use that to kind of narrate that. And we can talk a little bit about the, one of the things, we can talk a little bit about the closeness of that and how claustrophobic it feels. We can say the waterways narrow here and grow shallow among the gnarled roots of the mangroves. As they stretch out to sea. Let's see here. Twists and turns occlude. There we go. Your view hiding any number of mysteries from view. A little description there. Let's see here. We've got a couple other comments real quick. Jonathan says, strange pools, mildly magical or completely mundane, roadside shrines, a lonely inn at a crossroads. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. That kind of stuff is perfect. Where we're just coming up with a bunch of little stuff like this that give us a little vignette to narrate, a little bit of color to splash up on the screen here. So let's capture some of those. We'll work on filling them out later. Roadside. Let's see here. Shrine. We really want one of each of these. Or if we have more than one, we want to put a little bit of flavor into it. So, for example, there might be more than one inn, and so we flavor one of them. One of them's an inn, one of them's a tea house, one of them's a hostel, one of them's a XYZ. That kind of stuff. As we kind of build this out, just depends on the world in which we have sort of created this. And we can have little hamlets that kind of pop up depending on the scale that we're doing. If this is a sweeping scale, we can have bigger things. If it's a smaller, like we're traveling within a city, same approach. It's just smaller stuff. It might be, a statue or a roundabout or something along those lines in a city, whereas it might be a hamlet, a whole hamlet that we pass through if we're traveling the countryside. So in fact, let's put that in here because we are traveling the countryside. And let's see here, Lonely Inn, and magical pools, magical tide pools. I like that. Yeah, so we just keep going. We keep coming up with ideas for this, and ideally, what you want to do is when you kind of have your general map of this, kind of put some of these around the world, so that when you are running the adventure, you can have your map in front of you, and then okay, we're going from Darkport to, the characters are going from Darkport to the Sirens Atoll. Well, now you can see all of the little landmarks that are along the way, and you can use those as part of your narration. So you've given yourself some color, you've given yourself some tools and places for things to happen. Because one of the other things is, when we have encounters, where do they occur? They occur at nondescript places along the way. They can, but it's much cooler if they happen at some of these points of interest. You have a combat encounter in the little hamlet that you walk through. You have a role play encounter at one of the shrines. You have a hazard encounter in the mangrove forest. That kind of stuff becomes far more memorable, and you have these moments that are going to stand out as part of the adventure, as opposed to it just being kind of this wash of, and then a few things happened, and we got from point A to point B. So, let's come up with some examples. I think the combat counters are pretty self-explanatory, and we can certainly come up with some more of those. But that's what I think most people are familiar with. You're looking for a low to medium difficulty combat encounters, maybe a high difficulty encounter in there as you kind of build out the table. But this is your standard kind of random encounters table. And I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time kind of getting into the description of that. You can make a unified table for this, by the way, if that helps you, where you have, combat encounters and role-play encounters and hazards on there all on one table, and you can roll, a D100 or whatever and pick based off of that. And if you want to get to the maths on probability and what have you, you can certainly do that if that makes you happy. I tend to create distinct tables for each one, because I just kind of find that as I play, something feels right. This feels like a moment for a combat encounter. This feels like the moment for a role play encounter. This feels for a hazard or something along those lines, for something to happen. Or maybe I don't want anything to happen at all, and we're just kind of moving through a certain section that is supposed to be kind of a lonely, boring part of the journey, because that's okay too, to have those every once in a while to punctuate those higher tension points. So I just kind of give myself a couple different tables that I can pluck from, and I can add spice as I see fit. So let's come up with some examples of some of the role play encounters. And I want to do two for this. We're gonna create a table, because we do want to give ourselves the ability to do some randomness in this. Not that we have to do randomness, but it's nice to have in case you're just like, I don't know what to pick, like I do all the time. I'll get to one of these and go, is A or B the best? I don't know. Let's roll. So we're gonna we're going to shoot for the sky, and we're going to say we want something like 20 different encounters in this case, because we're creating a really big world right now, right? If we were doing something smaller, we'd do fewer encounters, and we're certainly not going to populate this whole thing out tonight, and maybe we're going to be overly ambitious by doing this, but let's give ourselves some space to grow. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not going to number the whole thing tonight. We don't need to sit here and watch me type out individual numbers. All right, encounter. And again, if you want to get into some of these things that are more probable than others, you can play with the dice rolls if you like. I don't generally worry about the bell curve for it. That's more work that I'm usually interested in doing. And frankly, if something seems cool, I'm probably going to just pluck it out and use it when it seems right. We got another comment in the chat here, Jonathan Frost. Merchant wagon stuck in the muck. Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're talking about here with like an NPC sort of encounter, right? So we have, let's see here, traveling merchant. Traveling merchant's wagon is broken down / stuck. We'll give ourselves, because then we roll it twice, we can make it a little bit different. The merchant looks to the PCs for help. It can be as simple as something along those lines, and we can figure out. I don't like the there. We're gonna get rid of that. We can, each time that we roll that, we can decide sort of what flavor of merchant it is. What I find is really cool. Is if you leave yourself a little bit of room in these so that you can tie them into character backstories as you have them. So giving yourself a little bit of wiggle room, So it's a traveling merchant's wagon, but perhaps it's a merchant in the same business as somebody who has the artisan background in your group, or as one of their tool proficiencies, or is from the same place that they're from, or especially in a domain of dread like this where people kind of get stuck here for various reasons. You can have giving some of those little bit of like role play hooks to some of these encounters, giving yourself some room for those, can turn this from just a like, oh yeah, we helped the merchant get unstuck. Cool, here's my athletics check. Okay, yep, wagon wheels free now. Everybody go along your way, to I met somebody from XYZ, or now I know somebody who can create or can make something for me, or a merchant who owes me a favor, and so the next time we're back in that town, I can look them up. We've come up with a session where it's kind of like, I know a guy. And so giving some of those hooks in there, leaving yourself some room for those hooks in there is useful. Another suggestion from Jonathan is child chasing a runaway farm animal or pet. Yeah. That's along the lines, again, that's the kind of random NPC interactions we're looking for some of the role play encounters on here. And we're going to add a whole bunch more of these as we go, but I also want to talk about some encounters. So some of the PC kind of PC to PC encounters, right? Some of the role playing hooks. And so this takes a little bit of extra work, and this is something that you're going to have to work a little bit on when you know your players. And so we're going to come up with some generic ones for this, things that I would put down to kind of prompt me, but I might not use them verbatim when I'm actually playing. So, for example, might say, on a lonely night on the road, one of the PCs brings up a we could say, you know, I mean, generically, we'd say something like brings up a controversial topic or brings something political, or, you know, we could, um, we want to build it into the kind of the world that we're in, and we want to build in some of the character backstories when we do this, ideally, because you want to give them something to actually talk about. Um, you know, you might, we might say something along the lines of one of the PCs reveals reveals a previously unknown part of their backstory um, to their to the others. You just say in there. So something along the lines of we're giving them sort of a conversation starter for their characters. Um, if you're playing a campaign that has a lot of politics and has a lot of factions or things like that in that, you can tie some of that in here. You know, for example, if um, you know, we could do one where we could say one of the PCs learns a secret about another PC. What is that secret? And what do they do with it? You know, again, these are a little bit generic because you want to hone these down to the characters that you're playing with. So these become somewhat of space holders when you're prepping this when you don't know the characters. But when you do know your characters and you know their backstories, you can weave some of this kind of stuff in. Um, you know, for example, the Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign has secrets that every character in there gets a secret. We could work on some of these role play encounters to tease at some of those secrets a little bit. You know, we could say, hey, one of the PCs drops a clue about their secret. Which PC is it? What's the clue? What does everybody else do about it? And it's easy enough for you as the DM to pick somebody, kind of toss that out, toss that little role play grenade out, and let them work on that and chew on that. And so, giving ourselves a few like role play prompts like that that aren't just NPC to PC, but are PC to PC, can be really, really rewarding when you're running this sort of travel. Um, so that's some examples of NPC to PC roleplay encounters, and then PC to PC roleplay encounters. And having a blend of those helps keep the players on their toes and helps keep things really kind of interesting and gives you a pool of things to pull out. And remember, you're not doing this at every campfire, right? You're not saying, you know, this isn't an everyday, there is a combat encounter, there is a role playing encounter, and there's a hazards encounter. Now, this is a sort of over the sweep of time that they spend traveling, you have these little vignettes, moments of excitement that aren't just them putting one foot in front of the other, but are they come to a point of interest and something interesting happens. And so you can sprinkle these in as needed to get that nice rise and fall of tension, right? Where excitement happens and then something, then tensions cool. Then we have more excitement that happens and then tensions cool. And we have these highs and these lows. And so they don't all need to be high intensity. They don't all need to turn into, deep, heartfelt discussions. It's okay to have a swashbuckling encounter and then a lonely night of chatting. Those things pair really well together because they give you your highs and your lows. They give you that arc. So I've been talking for a little while, haven't checked the chat. So let's see here, Jonathan. Exhausted fellow traveler. Why are they exhausted? Yeah, all that kind of stuff is cool NPC to PC, and worthwhile putting in there, especially if you can use it to kind of hint at what's to come and what's coming up next. So while we've still got a little bit of time here, let's talk about hazard encounters. And hazard encounters are another thing that I would do a table for here. but hazard encounters are a sort of a something goes wrong kind of thing where, um, you know, uh, one of the some of the most memorable moments of travel, in my experience, are when things go sideways. I'm gonna, and they don't have to go sideways in a big way. Um, they can go, it can be little things that add just a little extra layer of challenge. And especially, this is especially useful if you are engaging with the logistics of travel in your game, meaning you're accounting for rations and, they're having to find campsites and do all that kind of stuff. This sort of stuff really adds a layer of complexity to that and takes those things from just being kind of a dry die roll to uh, um, to a situation that is a little more memorable. Um, and I'm going to tell you a non D and D, like a real life kind of travel story, real quick, just to kind of illustrate my point. So when I was in college, a girlfriend and I went to Florence for vacation to go visit one of her friends who was studying abroad. And I had been out of the country. My girlfriend had not ever traveled out of the country at that point. And so she didn't realize that she needed to get her luggage before we went through customs in Italy. And so we got separated going through customs because we weren't a couple. And so we were going through separate lines. Or we were a couple, we weren't a married couple. And so we were going through separate lines. And so I come out on the other side and I find her waiting and she doesn't have any of her bags and I have all of my bags. We are now past those like no re-entry doors, right? Well, we had to figure out a way to get back in there to to get her luggage so that she wasn't without literally everything during this trip. And long story short, I mean, I found one of the luggage porters. I bribed him with a carton of cigarettes. He got me back through the do not enter doors surprisingly easily. I got her luggage and we got out. But it but it's a simple sort of thing that became a very memorable sort of moment, right? And while you're not dealing with airplane luggage and D&D and TTRPGs, you are dealing with other stuff. So, things like, again, another real life sort of travel story here is that, like, the monkeys in Gibraltar are famous for stealing people's cell phones and holding them ransom until you give them food, right? They have figured out that you will trade your food for your cell phone because your cell phone's far more valuable to you than your snacks are, right? And the snacks are more valuable to the monkey than your cell phone is, right? But you can do little things like that in TTRPG encounters where you have mischievous critters that steal stuff. Rations go bad, water gets spilled, there's rips in the rain tents, all that kind of stuff that now makes a night of what would be otherwise regular sleep and slumber and just keeping watch makes it something that actually does require a roll or has a problem that now we're going to have to overcome tomorrow, and that's going to take up some of our travel time, and it's going to slow us down. We've got to think through all these challenges. So we're building some of those in here to get us thinking about what sorts of foibles might befall our characters as they travel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And again, we're just going to put a few of these down here. Because to be honest, since we're kind of doing a big world building thing with this, and we have a big world to fill, we were going to jump in and out of this probably for the next many sessions of this. Because as we come up with ideas while we're working on other stuff, we'll jot them down in here. We're not going to sit down and try to just populate these lists straight through. We'd go cross-eyed trying to do it. So let's start thinking about some of the hazard encounters, things that might pop up. So simple thing, that can happen when you're out in the wilds is you don't secure your food properly and an animal gets into it and you'll lose rations, right? That's a real thing that can happen to you, and it's something that we can work into here, and creates a logistical challenge for our characters. It creates one more opportunity for them to have to rely on something like Goodberry, or to have to do some foraging, which takes time if they go foraging. And Goodberry takes spell slots, so it uses up their resources. Um, Whereas they had planned to not have to use those resources by bringing things like rations. So let's say um, animals get into the rations, spoiling, let's say here 1d6 days worth per character. Something along those lines. Maybe say 1d4 if we're feeling generous, depending on, but let's pull a 1d6 to start. So something along those lines when we think of hazard encounters. We might, I like quicksand because I grew up in that generation who saw quicksand in cartoons all the time. And, like John Mulaney, thought it was going to be a much larger problem in my life than it actually has ever turned out to be. So let's work it into D&D. Let's make it other people's problems. So let's see here, like quicksand on the trail. And then we can, frankly, we can just say quicksand on the trail because there's rules for quicksand and how we resolve those. Jonathan says freak storm or road washouts. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. So let's do road washout requires bushwhacking to circumvent. And we put something like that on there. And now what we might call for in this case is the characters either have to decide to turn around or they got to go off road. And if they go off road, well, then maybe there's another survival check to navigate around, and that might add more time to their journey, extending how long it takes them to get someplace, which becomes a problem if they have to worry about things like rations, or if they need to be somewhere in a particular amount of time, if they're racing the clock for something. So tells us that, for stuff like this, maybe we want to make sure we have adventures later that are a little more time sensitive in some areas. Maybe that's a challenge that the characters end up facing as they're being hunted at some point, or they're racing at one of the factions to a known location, trying to get there first. And these are all things that could get in the way. Freak storm, absolutely big fan of that. You could say freak storm rolls in, creating dangerous conditions overnight. So we could do things where maybe they've got to do a Constitution saving throw to see if they get a good night's sleep because of all of this. And do they get the benefits of a long rest or a short rest? And so again, we take something that they were counting on, and we add a little bit of variability to it. We don't do it all the time because then it becomes something that they don't count on. They don't count on being able to get a good night's rest or or find a place to camp. And it stops being memorable. We just do it every once in a while. And so it creates this little bit of challenge. Let's see here. So we create things like this. And this gives us a host of engaging elements that we can link with these points of interest. And so we can create that novelty. We can create moments that challenge and change our characters. And really, that's all that there is to exciting travel, is creating those moments. They're novel, challenge and change your characters. And those will be, you will find that your players love travel when you start doing that, when you get good at that. they will look forward to the travel parts of the adventure because they're just as exciting as the places on either end of that travel. Um, they are just as rewarding to move through, just as cool. Um, yeah. So, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the evening, since we are pushing our hour anyway. Thank you so much for joining me on this very special episode. We don't normally do these on Friday nights. I'm considering doing these every other Friday now, in addition to the Mondays and Wednesdays that we normally do. And so we'd get an extra one every other week. If that's something that interests you all, please let me know in the comments. I want to do more of these. If you want to see more of these, you know, if you don't care about them on Fridays, I want to know that too. That's useful information for me to have. But if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps this channel grow and helps more people find me and helps me stay motivated to generate this content for you guys. I have a really good time with it, but it's really rewarding for me to see how much interaction you guys put into this and how much you enjoy it as well. And then the last thing I will say is a shameless self-plug. As always, I am not just a guy who creates adventures on the internet. I am also a professional dungeon master. And so if you ever want to jump into one of my games, you can check out those listings online at startplaying.games/GM/RJ just like my channel name is spelled, and just like there's a link for that in the comments to this video. And that will take you to all of my current listings. And you can join me on one of my tables online. I would love to get the chance to play with you all and enjoy one of these adventures that we create. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you all next time. Our next episode will be our usual Monday slot. So I will see you all on Monday. Thanks again.